My name is Leroy Maxwell. I'm the attorney along with Richard Rice for Micaiah Washington and his family. Also here with his brother Shaquem as well. We want to thank you all for coming out today. This is an important day as this has been an important set of events that have occurred. An outrageous atrocity has occurred here. And so I want to just begin by outlining what it is that we know at this point based off the facts. This particular situation. What we know around December 2nd, Micaiah Washington was traveling to go pick up his brother and a friend, Jacorian Henry, at his aunt's house here in the Reformed jurisdiction. On the way there, he got a flat tire, pulled over like any of us would, and began to change that tire. At some point during the time he was changing his tire, an officer pulled up on him. Officer Elmore of the Reformed Police Department pulled up on him on the side of the road and asked what they were doing. Micaiah made it clear, we're here changing our tire. Are you here to help us? She made it clear, no, I am not. I want to see your IDs and figure out what you're up to. It's not illegal to be black and changing your tire, at least not yet, but that's exactly what he was doing. And so she asked for licenses, and Micaiah and his brother Shaquem rightfully said, no, we're not going to give you our license. You haven't articulated any sort of criminal suspicion whatsoever. At that point, the officer became frustrated, and Micaiah, being the person he is, a positive, wonderful, intelligent young man, decided, hey, I don't want to cause any problems. I'm going to comply. So he gave her his ID. And at that point, he said, hey, I'm going to record you as well. I always suggest and always welcome anyone I talk to, always record the police. Right. If we didn't record the police in this situation, we wouldn't be here today. And so fortunately for him, or unfortunately, he began to record. He pulled out his phone. Micaiah did, and that's when he was tased the first time, all right? He was tased by the officer because she didn't like that he took out his phone and started to record her improper, illegal, unconstitutional search and seizure. And so he took out his phone, she tased him, and he hits the ground. She then goes to cuff him, and then that's when his brother, Shaquem, who's over here with us today, had the wherewithal to pull out his phone and start recording the interaction. And what we saw went viral across the nation because it was clearly assault and battery. It was clearly excessive force. It was unconscionable what happened next. What happened next is that the Officer Elmore, Reformed Police, handcuffed Micaiah Washington, took him to her vehicle, and then in a almost sadistic sort of act, once he was secured, once he was handcuffed, decided to dry tase him and hold that taser in his back for multiple seconds. While Mr. Washington screamed out, he cried out in pain, agonizing pain, while cuffed, while subdued, tased, dry tased in the back, while this officer seemed to get some sort of enjoyment from it. But even during that interaction, if you look at that video, Mr. Washington was still being respectful, still saying yes ma'am, still saying no ma'am during this entire interaction. Not a threat to her, not a threat to anyone else, but this officer thought that she could get away with something. She thought that there'd be no eyes on this. This is just a normal day in Reform, Alabama, that I could get away with whatever I want to get away with. But thankfully, there was a video here. After that interaction, these officers, and from what we know now, her husband, Detective or Deputy Elmore with the Pickens County Police Sheriff's Department, arrived on the scene and then went ahead and cuffed and detained his 17-year-old brother, Shaquem. And so we know from that point they took him to Pickens County jail, and they booked them in at some point later on the day. Mr. Washington here booked him, I'm sorry, Mr. Washington right here, booked them for trafficking fentanyl, for an ex-felon in possession of a firearm, marijuana, obstruction of justice, and resisting arrest. All complete BS. Complete BS. Those charges came in. He was held on a $500,000 bond. That's a $500,000 bond. And the officers knew that his family wouldn't be able to make that bond. I don't know anyone who could make a $500,000 bond just like that. But fortunately, his brother, again, recorded, and that video came out. Once that video came out, those charges started dropping like flies. They started dropping because Mr. Mekhi Washington was not an ex-felon. He's never been charged with a felony, never been arrested or convicted of a felony. That charge was completely bogus and just poof, disappeared. The trafficking fentanyl, and like I said, these officers knew what they were doing. They know the connotation that comes along with fentanyl. They know the legislation that's passed, that if you're convicted with the amount of fentanyl they accused him of having, you're looking at around a mandatory minimum of 25 years in prison. They knew what they were doing, but of course that charge gets dismissed because there was no fentanyl. There was no 7 grams of fentanyl taken out of his pocket after she put him on the hood. And we know that because there's a video of it. And once that video came out, those charges, poof, disappeared. And we expect the remainder of those charges to be dismissed as well, because there wasn't a single drug on Mr. Washington whatsoever. And we know he wasn't obstructing. We know he wasn't resisting. Fortunately, it was on film. And so we're moving forward right now because we know a couple things. But for this film, he would still be behind bars right now. His life would have been changed forever. But for that video, he would be looked at as a drug lord, essentially, and that's what they wanted to paint him as. This young man who has never been involved with the law at all, especially not to that sort of degree. And so we got to make this wrong or right. We got to hold people accountable, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Right. So we, within the next, I guess, few weeks now, will be filing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Reform Police Department, those responsible in the Pickett Sheriff's Department. We will be filing a lawsuit for excessive force, for assault and battery, for abuse of process, for malicious prosecution, because like I said, those charges were completely made up. And so we're going to file all those lawsuits, Fourth Amendment violation lawsuits on behalf of, we're going to file that lawsuit on behalf of Mekhi Washington, his brother, and the other individual, Jacorian Henry, who was also falsely arrested just for being there on the scene. And so we owe it to the family, to the community here in Reform, to actually see some reform, to actually see justice be served here. And we know that the amount that we're asking for is be $20 million plus.